can a tribute also be a criticism? In 1975, Jorge Luis Borges wrote a short story titled There Are More Things, and he wrote it in memory of H.P. Lovecraft. At first glance, it seems like a tribute, and yet, in multiple interviews, Borges made it very clear. To him, Lovecraft wasn't even worth reading. So why would a writer like Borges dedicate the time to someone he apparently despised? What's the point of paying homage to an author you don't even like? Was it an act of respect or a literary correction? The story moves within the realm of cosmic horror. It is a tribute, but it also seems to prove that Borges could play the game of Lovecraft and maybe to win. Before diving into their clash, it's worth asking, who were these two authors? Borges is the greatest voice of Latin American imagination, the master of symbols, of infinite libraries, of mirrors that multiply into the abyss. A writer who believed the universe was unreadable, but worth reading anyway. He prefers suggestion over explanation. He believed that a single, well-chosen adjective could say more than 20 of them put together. Lovecraft, on the other hand, was a creator of nightmares. He built a dark pantheon of cosmic monsters and a universe where the gods don't listen. And if they do, maybe it's even worse. His style is baroque, heavy with adjectives, sometimes excessive, but undeniably effective. Where Borges hints, Lovecraft describes. Where Borges evokes infinity with one word, Lovecraft soaks in it with tentacles and madness. In many ways, this is a symbolic duel, Latin American imagination versus American imagination. Two ways of facing the unknowable. Two ways of staring into the void. And yet, if you look past the style and focus on the core, the themes aren't so different. Both authors write about forces greater than humanity, about the impossibility of understanding everything, about the limits of reason, and the edges where language begins to unravel. There's a possible bridge between their two worlds, but Borges didn't like Lovecraft, and he didn't pretend otherwise. Borges accused Lovecraft of using too many adjectives, of having no style, of not knowing how to write properly, and as a response, he dedicated a short story to Lovecraft. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's take a minute to take a closer look at Borges. Because even though he was a war man, and in interviews very different from his written self, the Argentine author was never afraid to be critical, not even with celebrated authors, and not even with those who admired. When he spoke about Arthur Conan Doyle, for instance, he didn't hesitate to point out something many Sherlock Holmes fans would rather ignore, that some of the detective stories were, at their core, narrative traps, that the clues weren't always in the text, so that the reader couldn't solve the mystery on their own, because Conan Doyle would withhold key information, so only Sherlock Holmes could reach the solution. Borges said it plainly, they were tricks, and he said it with that signature mix of courtesy and of disdain. But perhaps the most brutal example of his honesty came in his interaction with Mario Vargas Llosa, a Nobel Prize winner in literature. Their legendary exchange happened in 1982. Vargas Llosa, who was already an established literary figure, visited Borges for an interview. It was a meeting filled with admiration. Vargas Llosa admired Borges deeply. He described their encounter like this: "I got to visit his apartment. It was very modest." And he added, "Extremely simple and almost empty of books, not a single copy of his own works. He had very few books, and very carefully chosen. And as any good journalist would, he couldn't help including a very human detail. I remember very clearly there was a leak in the ceiling, and it kept interrupting our conversation." That comment made it into the published interview, the comment about the water leak, and Borges did not appreciate it. Later, when asked about his meeting with Master Vargas Llosa, Borges replied, "A Peruvian came to visit me. I think that he worked in real estate." Ouch. But that was Borges. He could be generous. True. He was brilliant. He was charming. But if something rubbed him the wrong way, or if he felt someone was using him for a nice quote or a photo, he could be cutting, cold, elegant, and brutal. and that's what happened to Vargas Llosa. But now, let's talk about what happened to H.P. Lovecraft, because that clash, Borges answered even more sharply. We know for sure that H.P. Lovecraft never read Borges. The American author died in 1937, and Borges' first internationally recognized short story came even later. In that sense, the relationship was one-way, because Borges did read Lovecraft, and it was not a gentle reading. Thanks to interviews and the preface he wrote for an anthology, we know that Borges read at least 7 of Lovecraft's stories, enough to form a clear and devastating opinion. In his early interviews, Borges didn't pull punches. He said Lovecraft, and I quote, "didn't know how to build a story. There's no reason to read him." And he also said, "he is not the best writer in the world." Classic Borges, delivered in a soft voice, but with that unmistakable edge. To him, Lovecraft had great imagination, but no form. He had monsters, but no true grasp of the language. What irritated Borges the most was Lovecraft's style, that baroque flood of adjectives, that need to underline the horror with every word, as if the reader couldn't imagine it on their own. And yet, later on, Borges' opinion seemed to soften, at least a little. In a 1979 interview, he offered a more nuanced take. His words changed, and I quote him once again. "I enjoy Lovecraft's horror stories." And he added, "his plots are very good, but his style is atrocious. I once dedicated a story to him." It's a sentence full of contradictions, because while he says it politely, he still called Lovecraft writing atrocious. What Borges offered was a tribute, but also something a bit more complex, a kind of literary intervention. He wasn't celebrating Lovecraft's style, but he did recognize that Lovecraft's ideas had value, ideas that, according to Borges, deserved to be told better. Welcome to my channel. I'm Bandido, and if you've seen these videos before, thank you for coming back. And if this is your first time here, I'm glad we've crossed paths. This is a space where I talk about films, series, books, or any cultural phenomenon that strikes me as interesting, not just for what it says, but for what it reveals about us. Here, I use storytelling as a mirror, a tool, and a compass. Welcome. The sharpest criticism Borges ever made of Lovecraft came in the form of a short story. In 1975, Jorge Luis Borges published There Are More Things, and he added a subtitle, In Memoriam, H.P. Lovecraft. The story appeared in the Book of Sand, which Borges considered his more mature work, his personal favorite. In other words, this wasn't some throwaway tribute. It was part of the core of his literary career. The title, There Are More Things, comes from a line in Shakespeare's Hamlet. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And with just that, Borges elevated Lovecraftian horror to a more literary space. He's planting his flag. This won't just be a scary story. It's a conversation with the great ghosts of literature. Borges sets up a classically Lovecraftian scenario, a ruined house, a creature that cannot be described, neighbors who avoid the subject, clues pointing to an inhuman presence. But there's one major difference. There are no screams, no inflated adjectives, no narrators losing their minds. The protagonist sees something, but tells it with unsettling calm. He doesn't fall apart, he doesn't go mad, as if the most monstrous thing is not what he saw, but the fact that he can still talk about it. That gesture, that restraint is the real Borgesian blow. The story seems like a tribute, but it's actually a quiet, sharpened criticism. Is there an intellectual jab beneath it, a sort of literary challenge? Maybe Borges respected Lovecraft's imagination, but didn't share his aesthetic. Maybe he wanted to honor him, but couldn't help in correcting him. Or maybe, like all great readers, he just couldn't stay silent, and responded in the only way that truly matters, with a short story. Before I tell you the story Borges wrote in response to Lovecraft, I want to introduce you to the main character. Because like every good horror tale, what matters isn't just in what happens, but in who lives the story. First, there's the narrator. a young philosophy student. He carries a dangerous kind of curiosity, the kind that doesn't come from desire, but from wonder. He even admits it himself. He's fallen in love with strange women just to figure out who they are. He has read Berkeley and Hinton, not for the academic credit, but because reality, as it is, just isn't enough for him. He's the kind of character who, when something strange happens, doesn't run. On the contrary, he approaches. He is also the nephew of another character, the man who died, who is our second character, Edwin Arnett, the dead uncle. From the very first line, we know that he is gone, but his shadow lingers in every part of this story. He was an engineer. He spoke of time as if it were a chessboard, loved dogs and impossible books. He lived alone in a distant house known as the Red House, or in Spanish, La Casa Colorada, the colored house, literal. And that enigmatic house leaves a question behind, one that someone, his nephew, the narrator, feels the need to answer. Then there's our third character, Alexander Moore, the architect. He was Arnett's friend. He's the one who built the Red House, the Casa Colorada. When the new buyer asked him to tear it down and build something else, he refused, because to him, architecture isn't just a job, it's a religion. And building a temple for something inhuman is an abomination. Moore is a character who knows more than he says. And then we go with our fourth character, Max Pretorius. He's the buyer of the house, I mean. We never actually see him, but his name hovers like a warning. We know he paid double the price for the house. He threw out all the furniture, remodeled everything in secret, and then he just vanished. No one in town remembers him clearly, but everyone mentions him with a subtle kind of nervousness. And then there's our fifth and final key character, the inhabitant. It has no name, no form. Maybe it lives in the house, or maybe it is the house. It's not a classic ghost, it's something worse. It's a villain presence without face, without origin, without any human logic. The inhabitant is a being, and we're not sure if it actually hates us, but we're certain that it's quite bigger than us in force. These are the characters, absent, silent, or incomplete, with which Borges builds his story. Let's begin with There Are More Things, because some stories feel like they were written with ink, and others with shadow. There Are More Things by Jorge Luis Borges is one of the latter. It starts with a dedication, and ends up with a door left open, because that's what this story is about, a door that never quite closes. The story begins with a death, the death of the uncle of the narrator. The narrator, a young philosophy student in Texas, receives news that his uncle, a curious solitary man obsessed with the riddles of the universe, has died in Argentina, in South America, in the same city where the Red House is located. A strange construction set apart from everything, surrounded by trees that seem to weigh more than air itself. The narrator remembers his childhood visits to the house, which by the time the story begins, no longer belongs to his dead uncle. What follows is not a ghost story. It's one of those stories that begin when you return to a place that once was yours and realize you no longer recognize it. The house has been sold. The new owner is named Max Pretorius, a foreigner no one really knows, but everyone sort of remembers. He is paid more than double the price for the property. He threw out all the furniture, including those strange books and maps, and had the whole place remodeled in secret, at night, by carpenters who now refuse to speak about it. The narrator, pushed by memory and by that kind of curiosity you can't quite explain, starts to investigate. The same curiosity that made him try different substances or read Hinton in an attempt to understand dimensions that don't exist leads him to the house. He talks to the neighbors, to the old architect who was his uncle's friend, and to an Italian carpenter who finally gives him the story's most honest line. That man was crazy, and I wouldn't go back to that house for all the gold in the world. And just when it seems like there are no more clues to follow, a storm arrives. It was one of those hot, suffocating nights, rain pouring down, thunder and lightning all around. The narrator finds himself standing before the old gate of the house. He touches it and the gate swings open. So he enters the red house, the Casa Colorada, and what he finds inside is not precisely terror, it's incomprehension. Uplifted floors, furniture that doesn't follow any human logic, objects clearly not made for us. A foreign architecture, as if the house had been adapted to fit another species, as if the inhabitant, whatever it may be, didn't want to live like a human. We never see the inhabitant, I mean the monster. Borges doesn't make that mistake. He gives us hints, he even describes its bed, and through the atmosphere, we feel its presence. The narrator climbs an iron staircase, and just when he's about to descend, thinking he might actually leave the house, he hears something slow, heavy and plural, and he knows that whatever that is, it's right behind him. So curiosity proves to be stronger than fear. The narrator turns, and he doesn't close his eyes, because true horror isn't found in blood or in screams. It lives in what we cannot understand, and in the terrible possibility that this inhuman thing might understand us. In a story like There Are More Things, what you see matters, but what's suggested, what lingers long after the final line, is what truly transforms us. Let's begin with the most evident and most unsettling symbol, the red house, La Casa Colorada. This is no ordinary house. It was once familiar, domestic, a place remembered with affection. But now it has been transformed, distorted, rewritten by foreign forces. It's a place the narrator returns to. He comes back from the United States to Argentina, precisely to Buenos Aires. And like in many return stories, he expects to find something untouched. But what he finds is unrecognizable. In literature, the idea of returning to a deformed home is powerful. It doesn't just reflect the change in the place, but the change in the person that's returning. The house no longer fits you, or worse, you no longer fit inside it. Borges takes this idea to the extreme. The narrator returns to a space that shaped him, his childhood home, his uncle's house, and finds twisted hallways, impossible angles, unnatural geometry. What once was a refuge is now a threat. This is a classic Lovecraftian device, space that defies the laws of physics and time, homes that stretch into places that don't exist, rooms that ignore geometry, staircases that go where they shouldn't. But Borges doesn't surrender to fear. He takes that element and turns it into fascination. The narrator doesn't flee, he moves closer, drawn in by wonder. And there lies this story's sharpest blow. Even when we know the home is no longer ours, when it has been invaded, reshaped, and profaned, some part of us still feels like it belongs there. It is the paradox of the familiar turned strange, what Freud called das Unheimliche, the uncanny that once was intimate and now disturbs us. Let's talk about the second key element in symbolism, the storm. The night the narrator enters the house, there's a storm. It's the force that pushes him without clear reason through the gate. It's the very same choice he could have made earlier in the story, even before gathering clues, but it only appears at that precise moment. And in literature, weather is rarely just weather. In There Are More Things, Borges uses the storm not as a setting, but as an engine and as an omen. In fiction, storms rarely represent only external chaos. They're often a mirror of inner conflict, nature reacting to the soul's disturbance, a sign that something inside the protagonist has begun to shift. Borges, a meticulous reader of Shakespeare, who, let's not forget, he honors in the very title of There Are More Things, knew exactly what he was doing. In Shakespeare's work, storms often appear when the inner world breaks down, when the soul collapses. Then the sky trembles, and that's exactly what happens here. The storm is not a physical threshold, it's an emotional one. It marks the moment that the narrator lets go of the logic, when he begins to accept that what he's seeing cannot be explained through philosophy, science, or by asking more questions. Borges doesn't resort to madness or to screaming, but he draws a very clear line. The storm divides the worlds, and what comes next no longer belongs to ours. Before we move on, let's pause for a moment to talk about H.P. Lovecraft. Because if Borges went to the trouble of responding to Lovecraft, it's because Lovecraft was someone important. Very important. Beyond his success in style and his personal views, which from today's perspective are often even racist, and seriously, don't look up what he named his cat, H.P. Lovecraft was, and still is, the most influential architect of cosmic horror. He didn't write about ghosts or demons in the classical sense. His specifically was a different kind of fear, the kind that arises when you realize the universe is vast, indifferent, and populated by entities that don't hate us, they simply don't care. The horror isn't that something is hunting us, it's that there are forces so massive that we don't even register on their radar. This kind of story became known as the weird tale. And a weird tale isn't just weird, it's a narrative where human logic dissolves. It's the terrain of cosmic horror, where the unreal invades the everyday, when the rules of the world start to break down, and where the human mind is just faint light shining into the abyss. But to truly understand how precisely Borges writes his story within this genre, and how directly he engages with Lovecraft, it's worth bringing in a more serious analysis. So without fear of sounding academic, I want to cite the Mexican scholar Andrés Torres Scott. He's a researcher at the Universidad Autónoma del Estado de México, and he wrote a very powerful article that I truly recommend called Borges in the Shadow of Lovecraft. There are more things. In it, he argues that Borges didn't just read Lovecraft. He also incorporated 8 core elements of the weird tale, the horror subgenre Lovecraft helped to define. So let's break them down. First, there's the atmosphere. Lovecraft believed it should be realistic, but infused with latent dread. Borges builds that mood with philosophical details, a desolate landscape, and the unexpected death of a sheepdog. Then, the second element is the hint, the subtle sign that something is wrong, the isolated house, the dead plants, and the uneasy silence of the workers. Everything seems kind of normal until it doesn't. Then there's the third element, the supernatural, and that shows up very early. Borges drops lines like, "Man forgets he is a dead man conversing with the dead." From there on, strangeness sets in. Late night renovations, disappearances, and a fear no one dares to name. The next element is the unknown. Twisted iron bars, cut down trees, tiles ripped from the ground. No one knows why, and those who do won't say. The fifth element is the unpredictable. Lights behind boarded windows, impossible furniture, staircases and tables not made for humans. Everything hints in the logic that it's not ours. The sixth element is the threat. At the climax, the protagonist faces something he cannot describe. He says only that it was oppressive, slow, and plural, as if whatever was coming up that ramp was more than one thing at once. The next element, the malevolent. Not a traditional villain, but a presence that does not belong in this world. The narrator wonders, what could it want on this planet, no less hideous for it than it is for us? The final element is the unreal, the irrational. Religion, superstition, dreams. Borges weaves all of this into a surreal image, a dream where a minotaur appears, but the minotaur is also dreaming. These are the 8 elements, not to imitate Lovecraft, not to copy him, but to write within his genre, on Borges' own terms. Borges never hid his disdain for Lovecraft's style. He saw it as baroque, overloaded, and a bit outdated. He thought Lovecraft used adjectives like crutches, and that the indescribable horror trope was, more often than not, an excuse to skip the hard work of precise description. Borges' literary background was shaped in a European fashion. He admired Chesterton, Rudyard Kipling, and Stevenson. And let's be honest and clear here. Borges was a better writer than Lovecraft. He wrote infinitely better. His texts are demanding, but crafted with a precision I've never seen in another author. Lovecraft had a wildly powerful imagination, but compared to Borges, his writing was a bit swampy. Let's be honest, it's a bit hard to read. He was obsessed with different topics such as biology, with inherited decay, and with the rotting body. His horror was more physical, a bit more grotesque, and filled with tentacles. And yet, despite all those stylistic differences, I believe that at the level of meaning, there are more factors that connects them than those that separate them. And maybe that's why Borges' initial disdain for Lovecraft eventually turned into a homage, a twisted form of admiration, because often we irrationally hate what we're secretly becoming, and with the benefit of hindsight, it's worth considering the possibility that Borges' irritation with Lovecraft came from seeing something of himself in him. Because beneath the prose, beyond vocabulary and punctuation, Borges and Lovecraft shared the same obsession: the limits of being human. They're connected by something way deeper than what divides them. It's no coincidence that both wrote about the universe as an infinite, incomprehensible place, of time as something that bends, of mirrors as abominable objects precisely because they duplicate us, and of God as absent or indifferent. Both wrote about the unspeakable, and both tried to circle the infinite using the finite language. One did it by walking into impossible libraries, the other by summoning formless gods. And maybe that's why There Are More Things isn't just a tribute, it's a quiet declaration that imagination comes in many forms, but that world builders recognize each other's in silence. Borges and Lovecraft, two ways of staring into the abyss, two opposing styles, two different worlds, and yet both left an unforgettable mark in the 20th century literature. They left us a legacy, imagination turned into words, and in those words, an invitation to imagine for ourselves. Impossible libraries, infinite labyrinths, cosmic gods, breathing houses, and dreams you cannot wake from. These are worlds we can still visit if we know how to read them, and like the narrator in our story, if we keep our eyes open. But what's most interesting about this literary clash between Borges and Lovecraft is not just the contrast between them, but the way that Borges responded. Because in our zeitgeist, you and I live in an age where it's easy to criticize from the sidelines. A tweet, a TikTok, a review that's just a complaint in disguise. The most common move today seems to be disqualifying other people's work. To say things like music today is garbage, cinema is worthless, or everyone has a podcast now. And sure, maybe there's some truth to what's being said about those industries. But what actually matters is not what we think, it's what we create. If no one's doing the thing you believe in, you can do it yourself. If no one's making what you want to see, you can make it. That's the idea behind this channel, the philosophy of responding with our work. And let's be clear, Borges didn't agree with Lovecraft. He didn't like his style. He thought he was a bad writer. But instead of stopping at criticism, he offered something else. He wrote There Are More Things, not to destroy Lovecraft, but to show another way forward. A response that didn't need more explanation, because it was literature. And as Shakespeare once wrote, and as Borges repeated in his own voice, there are more things in heaven and earth. There are more things. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing, leaving a like or a comment with what would you like to watch next in this channel. Thanks for watching. For today, that's all, compadre. See you next week.